Thank you very much, AIOS, for giving us this opportunity. At the outset, I'll introduce to the course. Optimizing outcomes, ICL, and I'd like to introduce my co-instructors, one of the leading refractive surgeon in North India, Dr. Kamal Bandhu Kapoor, a great surgeon, a good friend, and he'll be talking about phakic IL material patient selection. With him is joining Dr. Krishna Prasad Kudlu, again, a doyen in refractive surgery, pioneer in smile surgery. He'll be talking on my experience with Made in India implants. And along with me is again Dr. Lakshman Singh Jhala. He is again an excellent phaco-refractive surgeon from Rajasthan, and he'll be talking on phakic as an add-on lenses presbyopic correcting. And then again, a great surgeon, a great orator, and he is Dr. Gaurav Luthra from Dehradun, and he'll be talking on ICL and stable keratoconus. And to wrap up and to end up and to get the gist would be Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary, one of the leading ICL users in India, and he'll be talking on troubleshooting. So thank you very much, my course co-instructors, for making here and sparing your valuable time. I'm really grateful and thankful to you for being here. And without wasting much time, I would request Dr. Kamal Bandhu Kapoor to take on and pitch in.
Thank you, Sonu, and I must say thank you for giving this fantastic opportunity. I believe this is the first time we are having an AOS on a virtual platform. And it's not that bad. Apart from the confusion that you have, which hall you're in, where you're speaking, I have a lot of my co-instructors joining some other hall and then suddenly calling me, sir. But that, I guess that's a part of the game. But it's a great learning, and I hope with the enthusiasm, we are preparing our presentations and talking, the same enthusiasm spills over on the attendees, because there's no way of knowing, in a live conference, you see, so know how many people are there. You get a response and, it gives you energy. But here you don't know how many people are there, so I guess that's the way.
This AIOS has been very well attended, and I think this is a new normal which would set in options where now in the real world, I think we'll have a hybrid kind of stuff every time that we have now. So I think this will set new arenas. So all to you, Kamal.
Absolutely. So I'll be talking about phakic IL materials and patient selection. And as we all know that phakic IOLs have been here for long, and most of us have been doing them for some time. I'll be concentrating on a little bit on the materials, some of the studies which I could lay my hands upon, and the criteria for selecting patients, who are the patients to be done, where are the troubleshooting points, and which are the patients not to be touched. So I'll be starting with more than 2,200 cases done, helpful tips. I have no financial relationship whatsoever with any of the products I'll be talking about. Yes, I am a consultant, but I just do that for a hobby on design and materials. I do it as a hobby. I do that for most of the companies, but I have no financial relationship, no honorarium, nothing, and let this be there forever. Okay, so there are various options of phakic lenses. We have a very large experience with IPCL and ICL, though I have used the APA lens and the RIL and also the biotech lens. But I would mainly be concentrating on two market leaders, as ICL, as we know, is a market leader, and IPCL is number 2 in the world. And I think it's all made in India, desi stuff, and the way it's going, and I feel it's probably going to be the number 1 lens in the coming few years. So focusing on the materials, mainly the materials are the same. The only difference probably would be, I've highlighted that the water content of the ICL is slightly higher, and the ICL also has a collagen, which is porcine, which is 0.2%. The IPCL has got something extra, tert-butyl methacrylate, approximately, which actually imparts the monomer strength. That is the reason which in the V2 model, that even with a bad watt, you will not get a watt lesser than 450 or so, because the rigidity of the material doesn't let the IPCL collapse, of course, unless you have a high lens size. Now, I will concentrate on the benefits of using this high rigid material, what they do to the structure and the surface of the lens. This is a study done by Dr. Thiers, and he's a friend. He's in Madrid, so he shared this study. I also borrowed it from people in the company. He did atomic force microscopic analysis of the surface of majorly ICL and IPCL, and he studied in his lab, and he used an atomic force microscopy, and the results were quite startling. The results was that he took 4 IOLs and he, of -12 each of IPCL and ICL. IPCL was version 2 and ICL was version 5. This is the force atomic study of the surface. And as to our surprise, this is the structure of the surface of the IPCL, and this is the structure of the ICL. And what I guess is that the little bit of surface rigidity which the tert-butyl material gives to this lens actually gives it a very, very smooth surface and a very good refractive index. So the conclusions of this study were that IPCL, according to him, was statistically far more smoother in anterior surface than the ICL. Another corollary which he drove from this study was that smoother the surface, lesser the pigment dispersion, lesser the light scatter, and better optical design. So after having discussed the materials and surface, now I'll be coming on what are the contraindications of phakic IOL. Contraindications, as any kind of cataract, if you think, and of course, until unless it's a developmental cataract and it's not progressing, could be a contraindication. Corneal dystrophies, bad endothelial cell counts, anterior chamber depth less than 2.8 millimeters, but yes, you lesser anterior chamber depth in special cases, but for beginners, I would not recommend that. History of uveitis, posterior sphenicae, angle pathologies. I've had 2 patients where I did a IPCL and the lens was vaulting again and again. And I realized that we did a UBM and I realized that there were iris cysts in these patients. We had to explant the lens. So after that, I made UBM study a mandatory protocol in the preoperative. History of retinal detachment or shallow RDs, of course, for me, it's a contraindication. Keratoconus with very, very steep cornea, it is mandatory to measure the angles and you need to have a good peripheral angle before you proceed with these cases. For your patient selection, what I would recommend would be that, if you have a very high power, of course, IPCL is the choice. Even if you have a very large pupil size and large corneal diameter, IPCL would be the choice. Because I have actually put IPCLs up to 8.5 millimeter and 14.25 millimeter of optic diameter, of total diameter. Cylinders up to 11.5 diopters of astigmatic corrected with the IPCL, large optic sizes, large sizes. So then my choice of lens is that. Another advantage with IPCL is you have a huge inventory of sizes available. So you can actually tailor fit your sizes. 11.5 to 14 is a standard pipe. Optic size can be personalized. We have a smart lens. So what happens is in case you have a patient with astigmatism, I prefer going in for an IPCL because they have smart lenses. You don't need to dial them. You just put them 0-180 and they're perfect. Cylindrical power options are available up to 11 diopters. Now this is a post-operative image. All you need to do in an IPCL is 0-180. In ICL, you need to study a chart which is given along with the lens and you need to dial the lens according to the patient. Now we have a experience with nearly 2,345 cases, and this is a brief summary of all. The incidence of cataract is 9 cataracts I've had. 2 patients were the ones who had retinal detachment surgery. So post retinal detachment surgery, 2 eyes had a silicone oil induced cataract. Other patients was a case of bad measurement and bad fit in my initial cases of study. So this is where I come to the major punchline of the slide. Refraction is the bottom line. You should have a very, very accurate refraction. I recommend a cycloplegic refraction for all my patients because a lot of times these patients may be sometimes wearing overcorrection of their glasses. They could be accommodating and you can land up getting a wrong calculation. Second thing is in case you have an astigmatism, especially more than 2 diopters, also measure vertical white to white. If the pupil size preoperatively, scotopic is large, please order a large lens and mention a large in the file. Another thing to notice is that non-dilated pupil, if it's large, that's something to watch out for. And another interesting point is if you're trying to dilate the patient and the patient is not dilating well, maybe let's say around beyond 8 to 8.5, you should be careful because in case, especially if you have a large cornea, it'll be difficult to put a large size IPCL, let's say 14 millimeter lens through an 8.5 millimeter of a pupil, which is maximum dilatation. So watch out. Keratoconus patient, you should watch out. As I said, these patients will give you a false deep anterior chamber depth. You need to calibrate your anterior chamber depth and also measure the angles on an OCT. High risk group, since these patients are high risk group, do a meticulous posterior segment evaluation, rule out posterior segment pathologies before you take these patients up. Another important thing is that these patients could be prone to be steroid responders, this category of high myopes. So please do a long follow-up with these patients. Also take history of glaucoma in the past, or any time some steroids have induced some the steroid-induced glaucoma. Intraocular pressure records, if available, is perfect. Disc evaluation, OCT, and fundus imaging. Gonioscopy and angle measurement, of course, is fantastic. Specular microscopy, if possible, in Europe. So what are the issues we've encountered? Very large pupils. I've used up to 8.5 millimeters, as I said. Very large corneas, you need to actually go in for a larger lens. So make sure that your pupil dilates well. Secondary piggyback procedure, I've used it for patients whom I've operated 15, 20 years ago, and they are posterior Sanique, so I needed to break the Sanique. So I needed a thinner lens rather than a normal piggyback lens. So learning points here were always focus on your white to white. This is the break point. Your white to white is a break point. You should be very, very careful with the measurements. Watch out for IOP rise within the first few hours, especially it could be due to retained viscoelastic. But if you're seeing an intraocular pressure rise after a few days, this could be a steroid responder. Initially, if you're getting a Walt low, please remember, if you use a pilocarpine or a carbachol, the Walt will go down by 100 to 150 microns, which will improve over 2 to 3 days. And if you've left some viscoelastic behind, the Walt may be up by 250 microns, which will settle down by 4 to 5 days. The best way to differentiate is, if you have a higher Walt, do an OCT, AS-OCT, and you might be able to see some viscoelastic there. Don't be confused. If you see some whitish material behind the phakic lens in the initial few days, this could be retained viscoelastic. So let's see. If you have a large pupil, please note, contact lens trial is recommended for patients, especially who have intermittent squint. Mention a squint in your file if it is there. I've had 2 patients who had intermittent squint, but we forgot to mention in the file. And after that, they ate my head up. After the surgery, they said that I have induced the squint. Another thing is, if the patient has an amblyopia preoperatively, please mention it in the file and tell these patients. Most of these myopic patients may be 6'9", 6'12", best corrected in one eye. And once you do the surgery, they expect to be 6'6". So please warn them, mention them in the file. Pupillometry, dynamic pupillometry, I'll be very fast. Sonu, I'll just spend 1 minute extra here. Planning for phakic coil, this is the most important part. Sizing, you can use a vernier caliper. I would not recommend it. I only use it as a confirmatory mechanism. I use a Cirrus to do that. Which, if you use a vernier caliper, use the mid-limbal line. You can use this digital caliper marker. We have also standardized autorefractokeratometers in most of my clinics, and the nomograms have been set. In some of my clinics, we are just using an autorefractokeratometer to give a very, very accurate calculation of this particular thing. Now, one final slide is, if your anterior chamber depth is more than 2.8 millimeters, are you safe? Well, I would say probably not. Look for angle anomalies. Look for a resting large pupil size. In case you have a resting large pupil size, you will be ordering a larger lens. Then a simple 2.8 millimeter is not good enough. You probably need more than 3.1. So my nomogram is, if I am planning a larger size lens, I look for an ACD more than 3.1. Otherwise, I plan for a little bit smaller optic size. Resting pupils, non-dilating or small pupils, watch out. If you have a small dilating pupil, it's no use. Even a 2.8 millimeter is not enough. Flat iris for configuration or a plateau iris is a relative contraindication. Plan a little lower Walt if possible, but you can only plan a lower Walt if you have a lower lens size. Irises, keratoconus, and posterior Sanique. These are the things to watch out for. And this is what a lens size is. An angle-to-angle line drawn from each side. If you take the distance from this to the amount of anterior capsule distance, this is the lens size. I think I'll stop Dr. Sonu here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal, for that wonderful holistic approach. And I think our audience will benefit from what Kamal has spoken. So next in line is, I'll be talking on in the benefit of those who are planning to begin their refractive surgery, a lens-based surgery. So I'll just shift and deviate a little to how the beginners can begin with their refractive surgery. Am I audible, Kamal and KP?
Absolutely. Loud and clear.
Clear, very clear.
Okay. So I do not have any financial disclosures to any of the products. Basically, good outcome is a combination of a good product, an excellent preoperative assessment and indication, which the ICL surgery definitely stands to, and a good surgical technique, which doesn't require in an ICL surgery a much technical skill, and a good post-operative evaluation. I think a combination of all the four is what boils down to an excellent refractive outcome. We all know that the refractive surgery spectrum has shifted from cornea-based to lenticular-based and then combined. So a lot of young refractive surgeons come
Some internet, Sonu.
they have to
Sonu, we lost your voice.
Lost your voice.
on X refractive solution, whether a PRK based or a SMILE. There are certain caveats. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Can you hear me?
We can hear.
I'll just take a minute. Maybe my internet, I'll need to shift. Am I audible?
Audible.
Okay. I think this one here has been keep yourself muted, unmuted. Are you audible? So thank you so much and sorry for the break. So there has been a drift constantly between the cornea-based and a lens-based surgery. And there are certain indications where we really need to have lens-based surgery as one of the forerunners of the refractive surgery. So phakic intraocular lenses have been used in the past, angle-supported lenses, where we were using the Ecrisoft and the Artisan lenses. And now gradually there has been a shift over a period of years to the iris claw lenses. And what is now in vogue is the posterior chamber lenses. So why posterior chamber concept is these lenses are basically both protecting the cornea from the damage, the endothelium, as they are far from the endothelium. They have an excellent cosmesis. They're close to the nodal point of the eye. They help in gaining of the retinal size image, and they have a greater optical zone at the corneal plane. They are sulcus located. Is my voice audible now, KP?
Yes, boss.
Audible.
Okay.
Audible.
Okay. So they are sulcus located. So they have a very stable location, and it allows for the toric design to remain stable in the sulcus. They are easy to remove and exchange. I think that is one great point with these lenses, that any point of time, whenever we are taking these patients for cataract surgery, the lens can be explanted, or whenever you have a surprise or a cataract formation, the lens can be exchanged. There are no fixation into the iris tissue, so it does not alter the shape or remove the tissue of the cornea. So in toto, they are very safe, and it's a reversible procedure. So that's why they stand to the test of time. There are certain off-label indications besides their refractive indications, and now we routinely use these, as we all do, post-penetrating keratoplasty, post-DALC, ICRs, after cross-linked corneas, and in patients with stable keratoconus. And specifically, I'm talking in those gamut of patients where you have kids and they have high anisometropias. I think this is one new area where they can be used, even as piggybacking in cases of pseudophakic refractive surprise. I think my friend Kamal has already spoken about an excellent preoperative assessment, patient selection, and lens calculation. Just I want to highlight 2 points. Any anterior chamber depth less than 2.8 is a strict no to any kind of an ICL surgery. I think this is one red line which all practicing surgeons should take into account. The second important is, since we are dealing with patients with high myopia, I have shifted my lower age limit from 18 to maybe 21 years of age. And thirdly, I always would do a good fundus examination. Mandatory is the OCT macula, because most of these patients might have an occult CNVM. And yes, of course, the peripheral retinal degenerations is again an important examination point before they are taken for any lens-based surgery. Contraindications have strictly been covered. And yes, any zonular abnormalities post-dilatation, we have to look after full dilatation whether in certain subset of these high myopic patients, you might have a surprise of zonal anomalies or lens subluxations. So the ocular examination, besides the complete ocular examination where we do in all our refractive workup, the two most important workup which determines the sizing in these ICLs is the anterior chamber depth and white to white. So long has been debate what is the accurate way to measure an anterior chamber depth and a white to white. I think what works best in your hands is the idle tool, and a good calibration after repeated examination, after repeated surgery, and maybe instrumental calibration is what is at the end of the day boils down into an accurate sizing. So in my armamentarium, I would use a pentacam. So anterior chamber depth for me would be synonymous with pentacam. Whatever the pentacam reading comes in, I would always chip in as the anterior chamber depth. Then you can have an IL master or an OpScan. The white to white, yes, a digital caliper under the microscope or under the slit lamp for the beginners. And that is one which stands. And at the same time, as Kamal said, you can always compare with any of the equipment which you have calibrated. Maybe in the best of the hands of Kamal, it is an autokeratometer, or you can have an IL master or an OpScan. But the instrumentation has to be properly calibrated and has to be repeatedly checked for any false readings. Sulcus to sulcus or the STS can be done under a UBM. The angle assessment gonioscopy is a must, and a specular count always preoperatively has to be taken. So what does sizing basically depends on two critical factors, the white to white and the anterior chamber depth. And what does sizing mean? Sizing basically boils down into a vault, and vault is basically the distance between the posterior surface of the ICL and the anterior surface of the human lens. So it is basically dependent upon these two factors. And when we talk about the anterior chamber depth, we are talking upon the distance from the endothelium. So the default settings of the device has to be properly checked, proper calibration. And if you have any discrepancy between the two eyes, that is an alarm for a recheck. The points have to be checked at multiple places, just not a single reading. When you are talking in terms of anterior chamber depth, the angle assessments, yes, the iridocorneal angles have to be assessed properly. This is one beautiful paper which shows the results of Bland-Altman analysis, and it talks about the inter-device differences of anterior chamber depth when we are talking of IL master vis-a-vis pentacam, IL master vis-a-vis OpScan, and pentacam and OpScan. And all these instruments show inter-observation deviation of almost 0.1 when compared. So for white to white, as I said, a digital caliper is what I would pitch in. And initially, inexperienced people can take it under the microscope after putting a speculum and a drop of an anesthetic, and a good reading can be taken, multiple readings. So white to white can also be measured using an IL master and an OpScan. And there are certain gray areas when you have a pterygium or you have a pigmented area around the cornea. So these are the patients where you can take multiple readings on different instruments. Discrepancies between two eyes or maybe between measuring devices should be taken care, and both the eyes usually should have similar white to white measurements. Now, if you see here, an OpScan shows a white to white of 12.7, and when you go to the iMatrix tool, actually the reading is 11.57. So white to white on an IL master usually overestimates, 700 overestimates by 0.3 millimeters, 500 would do an overestimation of 0.5, and a pentacam usually overestimates 0.3 vis-a-vis an OpScan and a digital caliper. So the sizing of the ICL, an accurate sizing would mean vault of 250 to 750 microns, and undersized, we all know, can lead to subcapsular opacification. KP, am I audible?
Hello? Yes.
Audible.
I can see some distance. Okay, it's okay. An oversized ICL where the vault is more than 1000 volts may cause the pushing of the iris anteriorly and can cause a rise in the intraocular pressure and malfunctioning. So 2 slides which I share from my friend Kamal. How do you determine the vault size in implantable Coulomb lenses? There are certain factors other than the regular the anterior chamber depth and the white to white. I believe it's the preoperative anatomy and the lens parameters which again have some say in determining the vault size. There are certain factors like the angle to angle, the clear lens rise, the size of the ICL power, and the age. These are the 5 main factors which are predictor of the vault. So you have certain surprises. Most of the times, it goes as you predict. But whenever you have surprise, there could be other factors apart from these two, the sizing issues. So the angle to angle, the clear lens rise, as Kamal had pointed out, what clear lens rise means, the size of the ICL power, and the age. These 5 factors at the end of the day determine where. This is the slide which I shared from Kamal, and thank you, Kamal. And this is how the clear lens rise. So if you see a nomogram here, whenever we have taken the anterior chamber depth and the white to white and the refractive power, this is being sent to the company, and the company would then give us a requisite power of the lens and the size of the ICL, and the variable sizes which are available with them would vary from 12.1, 12.6. But what needs to be seen here is, if you see a white to white of 11.14, a shift to 0.01 millimeter would shift your lens size one size bigger. Now, it is in these borderline cases where you can have surprises, where your vault might jump up or your vault might go down. So if you go one size up with an 11.145 millimeters, you can end up with a higher vault. Or in cases where you have an 11.15 and you shift to one size lower, you can have a very low vault. So this comes only with your experience. And specifically in toric ICLs, I would always err on the one side sizing up. So now most of my patients, I don't go down, I go one size up. So I would prefer a little higher than a little lower vault, and specifically in toric ICLs, which would help me in keeping these lenses stable in their requisite position. Looking to the paucity of time, I would skip the video and would just thank you. So, KP, are you there? We can have 1 or 2 questions. Dr. Sanjay is there, I believe.
I can't see Dr. Sanjay. I think he's probably switched off his
Okay,
video.
so Kamal and KP, 2 quick questions. Sanjay is there, Dr. Sanjay. Welcome, Dr. Sanjay.
Yeah.
He's a busy practitioner. Maybe Sunday, again, he must be in OR having a good long list of his. So a quick question to all the panelists here. So in the general interest of all the attendees, when you do your anterior chamber depth, which is the instrument you would bang on?
Pentacam by default.
Pentacam. KP?
Pentacam.
We have in all our centers, we have Cirrus majorly. So I rely on Cirrus, and for last so many thousands of cases, it's worked. Another thing is a lesson for beginners is there are some times when the Cirrus, there have been 2 times when the Cirrus was not working. So what we did was we did IOLMaster, we did a pachymetry, and we also did an immersion with immersion biometry and did an AC depth and a pachymetry on an OCT. It gives a real, very, very near ballpark figure, but not when you're brushing against the teeth. You know, it's like when you have 2.85, 2.86, that's not the time to go. But if on these tests you're coming 3.1, 3.15, I think that's safe enough.
IOLMaster 700 also gives a good ACD sono.
Yeah.
So, and the second would be the white to white. So, Kamal, what's your take on the white to white? Which is one instrument you would trust the most, or the device?
No, there is no one instrument I trust the most. We have developed a nomogram. I have specially trained optometrists to do my white to white, and at least 2 need to match nearest to 0.1 millimeter. That's the dictum I do. So if I do an ARK, then it has to be calibrated with a caliper. If it's a Cirrus, it has to manipulate, one reading similar with an ARK or an IOLMaster. But as you said, IOLMaster is 0.34. In my experience, 0.34 to 0.38 higher. So we apply those nomograms in an Excel sheet, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't, then the optom probably escalates the matter to me. But most of the time, there is no single method which I have relied that I do this and I don't need to do anything else. I always use 2 at least.
So you said you calibrate against the digital caliper. So you believe that digital caliper is the best of these devices?
No. Again, I'll tell you. Suppose I use an ARK. I'll tell you how we do it. Maybe I'll probably make a video and show it to you. Suppose I have an ARK. So I place that ARK, a digital caliper, at 10 millimeter at the focal point where the eye is going to be. And then I calibrate my ARK according to that. Are you getting what I'm saying? Suppose my caliper is pointed at 10 millimeter, and then I bring it at a focal point of my ARK, and then I calibrate my ARK. So each ARK may have a play of 1 to maximum 0.2 millimeter, 0.1 to 0.2 millimeter. So each ARK has got a sticker stuck to it that what is the nomogram play around that. And based on that, which means I'm using, it is not the reading of the ARK I'm doubting. So no, I hope I'm clear. If the ARK is taken to 10 millimeter, it is 10 millimeter. But you may measure that limbus at 10.2 and I might measure it as 9.9. That is I'm questioning. So what I do is I mark that for my standardization of my ARKs. All my ARKs have been labeled of the error they give me, but none of them has ever been tabulated more than 0.02 millimeter. So maybe once in 2-3 months, my biomedical engineer just rechecks it again. And that doesn't change. Believe me, each machine has got a specific part. Over the last 5 years, I'm doing this. I've never seen a machine change its nomogram. Suppose my caliper says 10 millimeter and my ARK says 9.8. So I know on this, whatever measurement I get, I have to add 0.2 to it. Now I hope I'm clear to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kamal. I think that was an excellent teaching, Pearl. And I would now like to invite my dear friend, Dr. Krishna Prasad Kudlu, and he'll be talking on my experience with Made in India phakic lenses. All to you, KP.
Thank you, Sonu, for the opportunity. I think we both of them really were hanging around with most of the session. I think this is my last talking session apart from OPL. So I think most of my job made easy by Kamal and Sonu. So this is my financial disclosure. So just for someone just logging in, as a definition, phakic IOL is a device that provides internal compensation of the dysfunctional refractive condition of the eye to reduce or eliminate the patient's dependence on glasses or contact lens. These are the indication already Kamal had been told, so I will not be talking about that. So the patients are not suitable for this condition. Patient with the very high myopia, dry eye, extreme steep flat corneas and thin corneas. These are the contraindication for phakic IOL. I think patient with the history of uveitis, patient with the history of glaucoma, progressive refractory error, as Sonu was telling, ACD less than 2.10, no to ICLs, and of course, never ever think about doing a phakic lens surgery in the pregnancy, and also family history of retinal detachment. So these are the advantage of phakic IOL because it's far from the endothelium. As Kamal was telling, it is close to the nodal point of the eye, excellent cosmosis, stable location, does not alter the shape of the cornea, and mainly it is a completely reversible procedure. So these are the 4 or 5 model, the varieties of phakic lens available in the market. Already Star Vision ICL, already Sonu had spoken. This is from the Appasamy, and IPCL already Kamal Kapoor had explained about all the features of this lens. He had probably used the highest number in the world. And today I'll be talking about acrylic phakic from Biotech. So of course the difference is actually Star is from the Colomar material, but all Indian manufacturers are with the hydrophilic acrylic material. So these are the A list already. My previous Sonu and Kamal has spoken. Subjective refraction, keratometry, antechamber depth, pachymetry, axial length, and white to white. So as is cycloplegic refraction necessary? I say yes. And should we overcorrect to them? No. After cycloplegic refraction, whatever we power get, we have to order for the same power lens. Those who are already using contact lens for soft lens, I discontinue for a period of 4 to 5 days, RGP for 1 to 2 weeks. So coming to the keratometry, true K versus sim K, maximum range of true K measured by the topographer is ideal. Then is posterior curvature is important? No, will not change the toricity of the eye significantly. And antechamber depth, always minimum has to be 2.8. Always you should remember to deduct the Pachy value when you are doing with the ultrasound. So deep antechamber depth or shallow ACD, that is actually helps in determining the appropriate model. I feel antechamber depth is the only determinant which would prevent the patient from getting a phakic lens. So I was just, Sonu was asking me which is the best available. See, if you see here, A-scan is giving around 2.98, IOL Master giving 2.94, and ASOCT giving 2.98. So these are the three methods I more rely upon the ACDs. So A-scan is comparable with the ASOCT, IOL Master, ASOCT and IOL Master 700. So white to white, this we had already had a discussion just before. The single most important measurement which has a bearing on the success of the procedure. As so the Kamal said that take 2 to 3 reading, average of those reading to be considered. So always oversizing gives a higher vault, sometimes can lead to glaucoma, undersize can lead to a lower vault, then lead the patient having a cataract. So white to white measurement, if you see here, digital calipers, Pentacam, IOL Master 500 off scan, and Visante OCT. See, if you see here, digital calipers, if you do calibrate very well with the digital caliper, which is almost close to the off scan reading. So, I think this will not, I will not talk about how we measure the white to white. So once again, what and all the discussion, whether it is from the outer limbus to the outer limbus, mid limbus to the mid limbus, or clear cornea to the clear cornea. But I always measure from clear cornea to clear cornea using a digital calipers. So post-op observation, always you should look for increase in the intraocular pressure if it is IOP more than 24 millimeters of mercury or 10 millimeters of mercury higher than the preoperative IOP. IOP elevation is always the factor might be inadequate aspiration of the viscoelastic. So vault is the distance, as Sonu said, the distance between the posterior surface of the phakic lens and the anterior part of the anterior capsule. It is half a corneal thickness to the 1.5 corneal thickness, that is between 250 to 750 micron. So what are the possible complications can happen? That is low vault. You may have high vault also, refractive surprise, increase in the intraocular pressure, iris chafing, and poor corneal healing. This is a small video I'm showing about toric lens from Biotech. Once you mark in front of the slit lamp, make sure that your marking in the slit lamp is perfect. Then before making incision, you mark the cornea where exactly you have to place the lens. I'll just rest this thing. Then side port has to be done. Some people do even 2 side port depending upon the surgeon's comfortability. Fill the AC with a sufficient amount of viscoelastic, but don't fill it more. Very important. Then these lenses, I think, normally it is basically hydrophilic lenses, just to take out from the bottle. How we are loading like other intraocular lens, it's very simple to load. I just missed the incision part. Sorry. Okay, now I'll go ahead with the injecting system. So very simple to inject. The only advantage with this Indian phakic lens, this hydrophilic, the loading part is very easy. And how you load your regular intraocular lens, similar way to load. So the learning curve will be much lesser compared to the Colomar lenses, because Colomar lenses, the key is the loading. But here, I think any surgeon who is starting phakic lens, immediately you can go ahead with the loading. Then all remaining is same with the help of the tucker. You tuck underneath the iris, and then you can rotate the phakic lens wherever the desired axis. Then I always feel that once you rotate in a proper way, you can see how well it is staying, these Biotech acrylic lenses. But one important point I want to highlight here, that visco removal is very, very important. I always stay for 1 minute within the anterior chamber. This is my take on message to the viewers, that you have to stay in the anterior chamber for 1 minute so that to remove all the viscoelastic. These are the features of acrylic phakic IOL. Excellent visual outcome, easy to load. It has got a both central and the peripheral holes, very less chance of flip and rotation, as I was telling. This is the normal nomogram provided by the company, and you can place them the order. Our experience with the fake ICL lenses, this is about the study of 120 number of eyes, 120 eyes. Patient came for follow-up for 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, and 12 months. So we asked about the questionnaire is about the quality of the vision, and we took a uncorrected visual acuity, best corrected visual acuity, and also we measure the vault, and also we put the patient on topical steroids, and so these are the specification of acrylic phakic lenses. I think water content here 26%, aspheric lenses, overall optic diameter is around 6.5 mm, overall length you will get in 12, 12.5, 13, 13.5 mm, and the site of implantation is sulcus. The dioptric range is here. One more very good, I think in Colomar you get up to only minus 18 diopters. Here they even give the up to minus 23 diopters. These are the 120 patient data, I think mean age with the spherical equivalent. And most of my patients, since they are high myopic, the ACD was 3.44 plus or minus 0.22. This is the preoperative patient character. The 51% of the patient, the refractory error was between minus 10 to minus 15. This is the postoperative spherical equivalent. You can see more than up to 50% of the patient had almost the residual refractory error was around 0.5 to minus 1. This is the O in the phakic lens. I think every phakic lens are better. I think if you see around most of the patient around got 20/40 vision, which is very good. So IOP stability, we checked in all the patient. I think it was all right. Only couple of patients had a slight high in the IOP. Then we managed with the anti-glaucoma medication. Coming to the safety, patient achieving post-op uncorrected visual acuity equal or near to pre-operated best corrected visual acuity. The mean endothelial cell loss was minus 3.51 plus or minus 9.69 at the year of 1 year. That means not much the endothelial loss. 8 patients had an initial rise in intraocular pressure, which was controlled by medication. Spherical equivalent within plus or minus 1 point diopter in 100% of the patient. None of the patient developed cataract so far. None of the patient required IOL explanation. I will take a half a minute. This is our experience with the phakic toric 100 patient data. This is about the material, same material. I had already shown the video. Very easy to maximum 15 degree of rotation required in the sulcus. This is about the results of about the pre-op to post-op refractive. Almost 80% of the patient had a less than 0.25 cylinder remaining. Only 15% of the patient had around cylinder between 0.25 to 0.5. This is the rotational stability. 86% of the patient had less than 5 degree rotation, and all eyes had less than 10 degree rotation. In conclusion, ICRIC phakic and ICRIC phakic IOL torics, toric IOLs are phakic lenses are safe and effective for treating range of myopia and myopic with astigmatism. Short and easy learning curve for the cataract surgeon. Quality of vision is always better than promised. Long-term follow-up studies are needed in order to evaluate the incidence of cataract and loss of endothelial cells. Once again, I thank Sonu for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, KP, for that wonderful presentation. And hi, Gaurav.
How are you doing?
So,
Sonu, cannot hear. You have to unmute yourself. Sonu, unmute.
Yeah, I was trying to connect with Gaurav. I think Gaurav is not here. So, any questions for KP? Dr. Sanjay, do you have any questions for Dr. KP? So, KP, you have been using the Biotech and you've been using the STAR. So, do you think one very critical point that I noted, if you need to expand these lenses, what has been your experience vis-a-vis the incision size is required? So are these the hydrophobic lenses as easy to explant as the Collamer lenses, or maybe you need to increase the incision? And any experience with the iris injury or the lenticular injury or stuff like this?
We explanted a couple of lenses just for demonstration, and while doing the study, when we are evaluating the product, you need not have to extend the incision at all. Whatever the incision you have put 2.8, through that only these lenses will come out, even though it's hydrophilic.
The incidence of cataract, as you said. So do you think the, I mean, in your series, the incidence of cataract has been comparable with the Collamer material?
Same only. There is no changes at all. No incidence of cataract in my case series. As you said, here pre-op evaluation is the key. That is two factors, ACD and the white to white. If you do this to perfect, I think both the lenses are same only.
So I think that pre-op, it boils down to the proper pre-operative evaluation, whether you use any make. I think good pre-operative workup and a good patient selection is a key to refractive surgery based on phakic lenses. So, Dr. Sanjay, I would request your input on this.
See, we are all dependent on white to white. And we also know that white to white has actually no real correlation to sulcus to sulcus. It is always an approximation. And because it is an approximation, you get a surprise once in a while. But yes, these lenses do work very well on the basis of white to white. That is why it's still popular and it's continuing. Previously, they started trying a UBM method. But UBM analysis of the sulcus to sulcus was even more varied to capture the right distance. So they again came back to white to white.
And I think that UBM based was a little quite cumbersome, because initially when we started 20 years back, 15 years back, the ICL practice, we bought a UBM. But two of our patients just ran because they were quite, afraid of that cumbersome process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, so getting that fluid filled on the eye and, undergoing that procedure. So I think that's a nice pearl. So we'll have Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary as the next speaker. Welcome, Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary, on board. And your experience and your wisdom and your great teaching pearls have always been helpful in all the sessions that we have chaired together. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary. And welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sonu. Thank you so much. Just a second. What up? Hey, what happened? What happened?
I think the AV people can help you here.
Just a minute. Everything was fine. Yeah, they I found it now. Yeah, so share the screen. Share. Okay, yes, can you see me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you're visible and you're audible.
Okay, thank you. So I'm talking about the ICL and various situations, troubleshooting, problems, unique features, unique situations, a little collection which I've developed over time. So first of all, so problems would happen in the best of hands, in the most experienced of people. and it is how you handle those problems. Now, the first thing that I want to tell you guys is I've switched over to putting an ICL under BSS. No visco at all, even in the cartridge, even in the interior chamber. And this is this video. The irrigation is on continuously, and that is in my left hand. The manipulator is in my right hand as I tuck the haptics in. Before I tuck, I ensure that the axis of the ICL is already matching the axis marked on the cornea. And I keep it in that axis all the while as I tuck the ICL in the eye. And supporting the ICL with my left hand with the irrigator, so that the lens after the tuck opens out in the axis and doesn't move sideways. And with this, I'm able to finish off a surgery in 5 to 7 minutes. But it is not because of the speed because of which I'm doing this surgery. There are reasons for this. And the reason is that no visco means there are no visco deposits on the crystalline lens. No early post-op IOP spikes, as there is no visco occluding the trabecular meshwork. So for the past few years, for the past 2.5, 3 years since I've switched over to this technique, I'm surprised that this issue of post-op raised IOP is over, zero incidence. Once in a while, I did try a hybrid technique. That means I thought, let me put visco in the injector only and see how it works. So if I use the visco in the injector, there was some ribbons coming into the eye, but I really didn't find any much of a difference between injecting the ICL with visco in the injector and without visco in the injector. Total surgery time was shortened, and the beauty of it was that even at 2 hours post-op, when we saw that patient in the OPD before we let that patient go, the cornea was crystal clear. Vis-a-vis when we used to use HPMC, and HPMC used to take quite a while, almost a minute, to remove that entire HPMC from the eye. And sometimes still there used to be some residual HPMC, which took probably another minute. And in these long periods of irrigation aspiration, the cornea lost its clarity. But then it recovered by the next day. But whatever it, I assume it is better if it doesn't lose its clarity all along. However, I don't recommend this to be done by the beginners. At least 50 ICLs experience with visco, understand the system, and then think about this. Now, here is a situation where I have removed the visco thoroughly after 1 minute of irrigation aspiration, but still a number of you must be observing this phenomenon. The visco comes in from under the ICL, coming in from the sides, and it keeps coming out like a smokestack. Which means all that effort to remove the visco from the chamber is not necessarily complete. And this is responsible for problems. Now see this. I'm going to irrigate this out, assuming that all my visco is out. I hope I'm audible still. Hello?
You're audible. You're audible very well. Very much.
Yeah. And still after that irrigation, the visco was coming out. So this is what set me thinking, why not eliminate visco altogether? So I haven't seen a post-op spike in the last 1,000 ICLs inserted under hydro insertion. Now, this is one of the problems. Visco on the crystalline lens. And this used to cause a little haze because of the residual visco left after removal of all the visco. And we always thought that this visco, in case it was left behind, would go off in a week's time. But to our surprise, we have had some cases where it persisted for 6 months to 8 months. So that was another compounding reason for us to switch over. Now, when I was going around taking some classes on ICL insertion at various places, I asked people what was the major problem, and they said the loading of the ICL was a major problem. So much so that people used to say that before we used to give the side ports, we used to first take out the ICL and load it. And once we were sure it is loaded, then we used to go ahead with the surgery. So here, a little attention needs to be given to how to load the ICL. The process is very simple. After this ICL is in position here, don't touch it in the center and turn around the silicon tip applicator clockwise. It's like a gear system. You turn the silicon applicator clockwise, the ICL turns in anti-clockwise, and it goes into the cartridge. So you see that? So now you'll see one single straightforward movement. Not in the center, but a little ahead of the center. So that the whole ICL turns in a straight line. Not that one portion is turning in more than the other. Here, press, turn clockwise, the ICL turns anti-clockwise into the cartridge. It is so simple. And then another thing is how you bring the ICL into the nozzle. You need to have a good full grip. Here I've had a very shallow grip. You can see that very small. And every time I miss out on pulling the ICL in. So I'll just show you why I was unable to get a full grip. This ICL holder's mouth was not opening up fully. It should open up fully so it can go up till the end, hold the ICL in a larger grip, and then bring it to the nozzle. ICL opening sideways is not a very big issue. As it opens sideways, you turn the nozzle in, but you have to check this when it is about 2/3 in, and then once you think it is in the right position, you let go. ICL opening upside down is again not a very difficult situation to handle. Please detest from turning it around. All you have to do is you should have a forceps with a good grip. Most of the people use a McPherson, and believe me, McPherson is not a good grip to hold the ICL and bring it out. One of these, this is IOL holding forceps. Just have a good grip and pull it out. It is very simple. Iris can prolapse once you're doing an irrigation aspiration. After the ICL is in position, you have to remember that the AC has become shallow. The AC has become shallow, so the moment you come out of the chamber, the iris could tend to follow you and prolapse in the incisions. So this is where you really need a carbachol or pilocarpine. Just a little squirt, and the iris will come into position. Now, here is another point that you need to remember here is how to avoid this iris from coming into the incision. The iris comes into the incision when you're irrigating, and as you're irrigating, you're pulling out your irrigators. So along with the fluid comes out the iris. Now, the control is that when you are irrigating, you stop the irrigation. Once you stop the irrigation, a little bit of fluid keeps oozing out from the side ports or the main port. The pressure of the eye drops, and when you see the cornea coming down, that is the time to slowly pull out your instruments. Then the iris does not follow. Here was a situation where somebody had operated and the ICL was upside down. and you can notice how it is upside down. There's a total peripheral posterior synechiae. That means the the foot plates are pushing the iris against the cornea, and the optics was hitting the crystalline lens. We bought this out. We really could not break all those synechiae because those synechiae were there for so many years. The patient was going from one doctor to another doctor for glaucoma management. We used the same ICL and placed it in the right position. And what is surprising was that even after 4 years, the patient had not developed any cataract in this case. That was a very interesting finding. ICL in hyperopes, the main thing you need to know is that the ICL does not come with a central hole, so you need to make 2 PIs. YAG PIs are very painful, very disturbing. The patient is very discouraged. So vitrectomy PIs work well, provided you don't make this kind of a mistake that you continue aspirating and cutting and land up in a very large PI. Piggyback ICL, we did try in a couple of cases, more for the sake of trying, because the thing Sulcoflex was also available and at a much lesser cost. But these lenses worked very well as a piggyback IO. This patient is still doing very well. Okay.
I think you can continue, sir. We have time. Gaurav is in another talk. You can please continue.
Okay. So whenever we talk about the phakic IOL and ICL, the first thing that comes to the mind is cataract. That is the thing that every beginner is afraid of. Why should I enter into this trouble zone? Because you can have a cataract, you can have a glaucoma. So our experience with cataract was that as long as we were using ICL without the central hole, there was some incidence of cataract, about 0.4%. And the cataract was usually anterior subcapsular cataract. Here you can see in the left picture, the ICL with a very poor wall, and in the superior area, there's a little touch. On dilation of the same eye, you can see the entire profile of the ICL, and you can make out in the lower area, there's a very shallow vault, and in the upper area, there is a crystalline lens touch. And this patient used to visit us every year. At 5th year, we noticed that he has developed a small white spot here. On dilation, this was a clear-cut anterior subcapsular cataract. At that time, this was a fairly new thing for us. Nobody was very sure what should be the line of action. Probably even now, not everybody is very sure of what the line of action should be. Should we let it continue, or should we remove the ICL and place a size bigger so that you have a bigger vault? People feel that now that the cataract has set in, changing the ICL may really have no clear-cut advantage. So let the cataract progress and deal with it accordingly. That means you remove the cataract and the ICL. But this question, I will put it across to all the panelists. What should you do if you see an anterior subcapsular spot? And should you take a remedial measure to change the ICL with a higher size, or let it be? Now, ever since the Aquaport came in, the fluid movement across the anterior surface of the capsule was good. There was no aqueous stasis under the ICL, and so cataract development almost became a thing of the past. In our series, we haven't had a cataract for 7 years. So is the experience of a number of other people. However, I do see once in a while people presenting that they have had a cataract in the last few years. So you cannot say that nobody's ever had a cataract, but it's on individual experience of handling the lens. Glaucoma due to a very high vault, on the right side, sorry. On the right side, you see such a high vault that there's hardly any gap between the iris and the cornea. In such a situation, even though the IOP was normal, we decided that this is not a great thing to leave for ever. Let's intervene and reduce the size of the ICL and reduce the vault. We did that and it worked very well. ICL rotation, like Dr. Sonu said, that if you're using a toric, maybe you should prefer one size larger so that the ICL fits snugly into the sulcus and has a lesser tendency to rotate. However, here, this ICL, if you look at the dilated version, you see that the vault is very shallow. So if the vault is very shallow, we can assume that the size is a little smaller than what should have been ideal. So ICL rotated, and this is a standard rotation of an IUL formula, that if there is a 10-degree rotation, the lens loses 1/3 of its toricity. 20 degrees rotation, it loses 2/3 of its toricity, and 30 degrees rotation, all toric effect is lost. Now, suspect rotation. How do you suspect that this could have rotated? You probably think probably something, not my ICL power was not right and something was not correct. But you would suspect an IOL or an ICL rotation when there is an unexpected residual astigmatism. Best corrected vision will always be normal. You have not lost the quality of vision. Only that with a pinhole, the patient will be reading, or with the corrected glasses, he'll be reading normal. And you would always have a combination like this: a +1 sphere and a -2 cylinder, or a +2 sphere, a -4 cylinder, 1:2 ratio, half sphere, 1 cylinder. So whenever you have this kind of a combination in an IUL or in an ICL, always suspect rotation. Here the ICL had rotated through 60 degrees. Bringing it back is very simple. You just have to enter from the two side ports and dial it along. No big challenge. This patient, what happened? He had a cylinder of 3.5, and because of wrongly placed or because the ICL had rotated, the cylinder became 6. Because it had rotated through 30 degrees, 60 degrees. At 30 degrees, the power became 0. At 60 degrees, the power became double on the other side. So we brought it into position, but again, it rotated. So this happened in 3 cases. All the 3 cases, we brought it into position and they rotated again, which made us believe that once an ICL rotates, it may be a good practice to plan exchange with a higher lens. Thank you so much, Dr. Sonu.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for that wonderful presentation and very good teaching pearls that you have brought in. And I think great teaching pearls. I would like to just add on one of the forceps that we were discussing for the explantation of these ICLs. Once you have a reverse ICL inside the eye, I think that loading or that pulling forceps that we use to load an ICL, I think that works very well in even explantation of these ICLs from the anterior chamber. So I think that is one of the safest, readily available tools in everybody's armamentarium, which can be used for explantation. And yes, visco, this fluid-based implantation of ICL has been one new addition into this injector system. And I think this should be practiced only in under experienced hands. Once you all have done more than 50 or 60 patients on visco-based implantations, because it looks very easy in the hands of experts surgeons like Dr. Sanjay Chaudhary, and maybe Gaurav has been doing and KP has been doing. But to begin with, I think the lens and the endothelium and the iris, these are the three structures which have to be taken care. And whether we use a methyl cellulose or any other high density viscoelastic, care should be taken, because when you implant an IUL, your direction is directed towards the optic disc or the posterior pole. But when you are pushing in an ICL, the direction has to be in the horizontal plane, because otherwise you end up hitting the intraocular, the normal phakic lens. So I think that's a wonderful presentation, Dr. Sanjay. KP, do you want to add anything on that presentation?
Nothing. I also had a couple of patients actually. We have taken the patient like toric lens, we rotated, and once again it has come to the same position after a couple of days. Probably our vault that we checked white to white, that was also perfect. But what I feel that sometimes this sulcus to sulcus might be more than the whatever you checked in white to white. One more thing, and one more patient actually, it was something very peculiar case actually. One of my co-consultant operated patient after implantation of ICL, vision was 6/6, perfect vault, everything we checked. Even we send the patient to Narayan Netale to do the UBM, everything done. But patient complaining of a enormous eye pain. Enormous eye pain means it's like he can't even hold the eye at all. Then I took even opinion from Rohit also. Rohit said that it is not connected with the any of the ICL because they are dilated everything. The purposefully I have sent it to Narayan Netra so that they will have every equipment so that they can have thorough checkup. He said that it is not with the ICL, probably might be a sort of migraine headache he might be having. Then what happened? The same patient we put them. Then patient was like a toric ICL in that particular eye. It was staying perfectly all right. Then what we did? Okay, let us try one side. That we went inside and we rotated the whole ICL inside one time. Then patient told, "Oh, okay, I am feeling all right for 1 hour." 1 hour he was all right, painless. Then within after 2 days, patient once again coming back and telling that I am having severe eye pain. Please do something, take out my eyeball, that kind of talk. Then in the end, we removed both the ICL out of the eye. Still now patient said that for 3 days patient was all right. Then now once again he's coming back to us and telling that his eyes are still paining. This is the one challenging case I ever found out in my case, and it really made my consultant hell up this thing. He was calling him daily, and very difficult situation.
I've had one similar experience where we had put in an ICL and the patient was complaining of pain all the time, and the vault was fine and the vision was perfect. So the patient just couldn't get out of it, and he said, "Just remove my ICLs, come what may." So we removed the ICLs and the pain became okay. Right. So now we assume that probably the ICL is pressing on the ciliary body, and because of the pressure on the ciliary body, probably the patient was sensitive and he was getting pain because of that. That is what I postulated. Because after all, it is still there, no? It is in the sulcus, no? And that is where the ciliary body is. So somebody could be sensitive to pain when there's something pushing there all the time. What do you say, Dr. Sood? Could that be
I think
reason?
so I think all this abnormal, maybe a pigment dispersion or maybe this excessive pain, some kind of a neurological pain, I think I attribute it to the uveal irritation, be it at the level of the ciliary body or be it at the level of some kind of an iris tissue where the lens might be, touching or affecting. So similar to patients we had where they were, after doing one eye and they wanted the other eye after a week. Luckily, they came after 2 days or unluckily with excruciating pain. So, and there was no reason. The pressures were normal. The vault was around 750, and the angles were open, and there was the AC was absolutely quiet, and the refractive error was almost close to emetropia. So we couldn't attribute anything, and the patient had excruciating pain, and to the sense that he was taking injectables for 2 days. So on the third day, we discussed with the patients, and we had to explant the ICL, and within 2 days, the patient was back to normal. So I second your thought on this. Probably some kind of a ciliary body or some kind of an uveal irritation could be compounded by this. So you left us with an open question of a low vault on our V4C with a subcapsular cataract. So I think that's a very important, valid point to be discussed. And I personally believe on a V4C platform, if you have a low vault and with a subcapsular cataract, I think I would keep this patient under vigil and on a serial observations. And if I find that the opacity still remains non-progressive, I would not err to exchange on one lens higher. But if I feel that on serial examination, the opacity tends to increase, only then and then I would like to exchange with one size bigger. That would be my take on a low vault, and specifically if it's a V4C. Had it been the earlier model, I would have immediately exchanged, because I believe that the aqueous, the flow and the nutrition is quite great job with this aquaport.
No, but the fact is that the cataract developed in any case. So if the cataract developed, that means there was some deficiency to the aqueous at that area. So it is likely to develop more.
So
It
the
doesn't develop
development of the
immediately, it
cataract
developed
could
in
be
5 years.
Yeah, so it could be multifactorial. It could be during the insertion, there could be some amount of trauma, or because of viscoelastic. And if it has been there and it is not progressive, so why unnecessarily touch the cataract or maybe the ICL?
No, it was a shallow vault, very clear, very shallow vault. But even now, with a shallow vault of 100 microns, we are not really bothered ever since we had the central port. We just let it be and no problem comes in. Compared to the previous versions.
So that is what I want to highlight, that with the V4C, so for the interest of the viewers, the V4C model is one which has a central hole. It is called the aquaport and 360 micron hole, which helps in flowing the aqueous from the posterior to the anterior and maintains the nutrition of the natural lens. And so I think that's a very great learning point.
One thing which we should also mention now, which we have seen in about 5-6 cases, is Uritz-Zavalier syndrome.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, so have you come across something like that?
Yeah, one of my patients, and recently we were in touch with Gaurav also. I think probably he was also sharing a similar patient.
Yeah, so we have had 4-5 cases. The pupil is semi-dilated. The patient is a little uncomfortable. His vision is a little less sharp, and he keeps asking, what is this, and why is my vision less, and when will I recover? So we know that this has no solution, it will not recover. But the question is how you have to keep the patient going till he gets used to it. But the cause of Uritz is not very clearly defined, except they say it's some kind of an ischemia of the sphincter pupillae, and because of that, there is a little dilation. Hello.
There is a question for you, Dr. Sanjay. Hello.
Yeah. I can
hear me.
Yeah.
So there is a question for you from Dr. Siddiqui. Did the patient that you were discussing, one with a subcapsular cataract, did that patient had a blue dot cataract? That is his question to you.
No, blue dot cataracts are something very different, and they're in the substance of the lens. It's not anterior subcapsular.
So I think when you have a low volt and or maybe a phakic lens impinging and causing a cataract, it most commonly appears as a subcapsular opacity, and then the cataract starts developing.
Yeah.
Uh, the Another important point that you highlighted is if you have an ICL and you're trying to push in the anterior chamber, and by chance if the lens opens reversely. So at times people ask, should we fiddle the lens within the anterior chamber and try to rotate it? So I think that is one practice we all should say no, strict no, because anything inside the chamber, the lens shouldn't be fiddled and shouldn't be tried to rotate within the eye. So the lens should be expanded, push in viscoelastic, and then reloaded, and then try to push in the lens within the anterior chamber to the desired position.
The problem is that most of the anterior segment surgeons are so used to rotating an IOL in the eye if it opens upside down. So that reflex continues to the ICL. So this is where they have to take care that here it will not work.
And actually, you are working in a anterior chamber depth which is close to 2.8 or 3 millimeters, as against a phakic eye where you are implanting an IOL. You have a big double the space. So a closed space directed towards the iris, and taking care of the endothelium and the iris tissue, respecting the capsule of the lens. I think all these three have to be taken care. So,
Any time for one more question?
yeah, please go ahead. We still have, I think, 5 minutes more to go.
Okay. Now, there's a central hole, and a lot of people believe that when there's a central hole and the person is seeing through the center, will this hole affect the vision or cause any optical problems?
Sorry, can you come back with the question? I was just looking at the question. Yeah, please, sorry.
So the present lenses are the lens with the central hole. Right. Now the central hole is right in the center, which may not be the optical center, but it is the anatomical center. So it's very close to the optical center. So if the person is seeing and this hole is coming in the way, or its edge is coming in the way, will it make an optical effect on the eye? Will it disturb the vision in some way?
I think that's a very nice question, and in my practice, I've several times observed that the hole exactly doesn't lie in the center, maybe of the pupillary or the visual axis. And I'm quite surprised how the patient then behaves. And a lot of times we have patients coming to us where they would actually say that I can see a hole in the center of my eye, or they have those phenomena. But I think the adaptability over a period of maybe a month or 2 months is all that is required, and ultimately these photic phenomena go off and actually doesn't interfere with any kind of vision phenomena. I think the 360 micron hole, the whole concept, what this great scientist Shimugi came up with, I think is based on that anything more than 360 would interfere with your the vision, but less than 360 wouldn't really affect whether it is. And surprisingly, even if the hole doesn't lie in the center, it actually doesn't cause any visual complaints. What has been your experience? There is a quick question which I would like to share. Dr. Pradeep wants to know how long the post-operative treatment and its regimen, and what its regimen. And the second question is, which is the phakic lens of choice? And so the first question is to Dr. Sanjay, what is your post-operative regimen, and what are the drugs that you would use?
So here, because our inflammation is negligible, we do not use DEXA or PRED. We use Lotipred for a week, and along with antibiotics and the lubricant. That's it. A painkiller, if required, for a day. That's it.
So would you use any anti-glaucoma medications as a routine medication?
Since we are doing it under hydro, we have no immediate post-op spike, nil whatsoever.
And for people who are using viscoelastics, do you recommend any regime other than this?
For LASIK?
No. I'm talking about the phakic lenses.
Yeah.
So, ICL surgeries, if you are doing visco-based injection, so what will be your standard regime?
post-operative regime.
In fact, even then we were not using anti-IOP medication unless we felt the next day that the pressure was high, or the same day that the pressure was high. Then we did use it, but not as a routine.
So maybe a lubricant and a combination is what is required. KP, what is your phakic lens of choice?
Yeah, my phakic lens choice is both Collamer and Indian make biotech lenses I use, depending upon the patient affordability. But if the ACD is around 2.8, I always go ahead with the Collamer lenses. If the ACD is more than 3, then I give both the options of both Indian phakic and even Collamer lens.
So why is the limitation between 2.8 and 3 that you would prefer only a star?
Just because of these lenses, the acrylic hydrophilic lenses are slightly thicker than the Collamer lenses. This is the only one reason I think I keep it 3 and above.
Dr. Sanjay, your take on just
In fact,
one.
I use 3 type of lenses. By default, I use the ICL. That's the default. Wherever we can, we use an ICL, and that covers a power of up to 18, which is effectively giving you a correction of about 17.5. Now, if I have to go beyond 18, then I have to see whether it is a spherical or it is a toric. If it is a spherical, I can go up till 28 with what is called an MPL, Medeinium phakic lens. A Medeinium phakic lens is about 1 millimeter shorter than an ICL. It is not holding on to the sulcus, but it is resting on the zonules. And that is why it can rotate now and then, so that only a spherical power is available and not a cylindrical power. So we use an MPL if it is spherical. If it is cylindrical power, then we use a biotech lens, because we can adjust more powers in a hydrophobic lens. So this is a normal protocol of the 3 lenses used.
So thank you very much. And looking to the time constraints, it was a wonderful discussion. And I'd like to thank my co-instructors, Dr. Sanjay, Dr. KP, and Dr. Kamal for being with us and making this program a wonderful success. Thank you once again, and thank you AIOS for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sonu, for a wonderful session and the invite. It was a pleasure to be on board.